Welcome, Igor. Welcome, Zainab. We see you on the screen. Thank you for being with us. We're at NED's new headquarters using our hybrid system, and so we're delighted to join folks that could be with us in Washington, in Prague, in Nairobi. We've just heard some remarkable words from Carl Gershman about the importance of you, the importance of leaders and citizens leading this fight and taking responsibility in this era. And so we want to unpack this with your thoughts and the fight for a democratic future. During my transition, Carl and I met several times, and he really underscored the centrality of two things. Both of them were about people. One was the talent and the team here at NED, many of whom are with us in this room, an extraordinary team committed to the cause. But he really underscored that the work of the institution, the endowment, was about you, was about those on the front lines of the fight, as he said. So I think it's very appropriate that we continue with those who have known Carl throughout much of his work and have been doing this themselves. Igor, thank you for being with us from Prague. I'll briefly just introduce our colleagues. Igor Blažević is a prominent European human rights campaigner and democracy activist. Of Bosnian origin, he currently lives in Prague, but has been around the globe. He's leading Prague Civil Society Center's learning and exchange activities. He spent almost 2 decades with the People in Need Foundation, the founder of One World, the largest human rights film festival. And he's been on the ground in Thailand and Burma working with activists in a very difficult situation. He's been part of the NED family, serving on the steering committee of the World Movement for Democracy. It's terrific to have you with us, Igor. Zainab, good to see you. We had a good conversation this morning. Currently the Director General of the United Nations Office in Nairobi, an example of what Carl said, someone who has crossed over as an activist to a leader in an international institution, a longtime NED partner, one of our fellows. She chaired the World Movement Steering Committee and embodies the full range of support that NED can provide. Showing how local activists become major players in their governments and in intergovernmental institutions. She served as UN Special Representative for Sexual Violence and Conflict, Minister of Health and Sanitation of Foreign Affairs, and played major roles in Sierra Leone as the Executive Director of the National Accountability Group and other organizations that have been remarkable partners. Thank you, Zainab. Here with us, Nathan Law on my far left is a veteran Hong Kong activist, of course, the youngest ever elected member of the Legislative Council in Hong Kong, who's been at the forefront of pro-democracy activism in the territory since the 2014 Umbrella Movement. 28 years old, you founded a political party. We were elected to the Legislative Council. His seat was, of course, overturned. He was jailed for his participation in the movement. He's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize along with other Hong Kong activists and is now currently joining us based in exile in London. Thank you, Nathan, for coming. And Rosa Maria Paya, someone who Carl introduced me to early on in our transition, who's been a leading Cuban democracy activist and human rights defender. She founded Cuba Decide, the citizen initiative focused on change, political and economic systematic change in Cuba towards democracy through plebiscite. She's the daughter of the late Oswaldo Paya, of course, a recipient of the Sakharov Prize. And she's been an extraordinary activist and counsel to me. I had the chance to actually meet her again on my first day as NED president to continue our conversation about the fight. So I want to pick up on where Carl left the conversation, that the mantle of leadership at a time of challenge globally is really to those on the front lines. And I wanted to turn to you to ask, against all odds, how do you as activists maintain, how are you motivated to provide leadership in the fight where you have each faced challenges and setbacks, but it has not deterred you from your conviction? And at a time of uncertainty, as Carl said, can we see leadership for freedom and democracy around the world coming from activists on the front lines? Tell us a little bit, Rosa Maria Paya, if you kick us off, what has motivated you personally to play this role despite these challenges?
Thank you so much, Damon. And For me, it's such an honor to be here. Such an honor to be celebrating you, Carl, and all the work that you have done, all the support that you have provided to so many in the world. And yes, it's a really hard challenge to keep hope and to keep faith. I can only answer the question personally, and I think that's the situation of each human rights defender, each activist in a authoritarian or totalitarian country, as it is my case, or coming from an authoritarian or totalitarian country. My father used to say the first step is always the personal liberation. The first step is always a very personal decision, and of course the gathering of those personal decisions make a collective decision for the fight against authoritarianism, for the struggles for freedom, right? But in my very personal and specific situation, of course, that the example set by my father, the seek for justice on what happened to him, to my dear friend Harold, but to so many other Cubans, is transversal to anything that I can do. But I think that also what in a broader perspective gathers each activist that dare to confront the Cuban regime is not just that this commitment and this feeling that what we are doing is right, but also the convincement that it is possible, that we can actually liberate Cuba, that the Cuban people can be the protagonists of their own history and actually overcome communism. And that's the first sin that a dictator tries to target: hope. They try to crush your hope. They try to silence those voices that are encouraging the rest of the society to take action and to exercise what Václav Havel called the power of the powerless, that ends up being the actual motor of transition, the actual motor of liberation. And that hope put the Cuban people on the streets on July 11. And that hopes keep us in the fight.
Thank you, Rosa Maria. If Carl doesn't mind me picking up on what you said, my first day I walked into the headquarters here at the endowment, and Carl, you had left me a very generous, kind note. And in that note, he captured your words that NED really has brought together a community of hope, just as you said, and that this is a place important, that your work is what provides the North Star. Igor, may I jump to you and ask what has driven and motivated you from your work that has taken you as far afield, where you've been time in Southeast Asia to now in Prague? And feel free to share how that has intersected with Carl Gershman as well, Igor.
So it's a real, as Rosa Maria said, real honor and pleasure to be here in a panel with all of you and to talk on an event, let's say, dedicated to the Carl. Carl has been a huge inspiration for me. I learned so much of him. And there is many things what really kind of inspired me with Carl, but probably the most inspiring thing has been his capacity to keep on coming, let's say, with the new and new energies and with the new and new ideas. And there is maybe similarity between him and me, let's say, because I also kind of like to generate ideas, and then you see the people around us being a little bit scared. Oh my God, let's say these guys are coming with something. So, control them, put them under the control. So thank you, let's say, Carl, for being there. I have done few things in my life, good things in my life without Ned. And I have done few extraordinary good things, let's say, only thanks to the Ned. And for me, you have been real kind of inspiration. So, and I hope, let's say, that both of you and I will continue to generate idea and to challenge kind of people around us, let's say, to do things which they might not kind of think immediately. That's a good idea. Why I'm doing what I'm doing is, the answer is simple. I'm Bosnian. I never planned to be activist. I plan to be the writer, to read a book and to write the books, hopefully. Let's say. And then I experienced the war in my country, and I needed to deal with that. But then during, let's say, this necessity to deal with my own war in my own country, I learned one big thing. Let's say there has been a lot of very, very dark moments. Let's say there has been a hopeless situation, and basically everybody around us Bosnians saying, give up. You are so weak, give up. Let's say you don't have a chance. Sign whatever Milosevic is asking you to sign and you will get a peace. And we didn't sign. Let's say we basically struggled. Even the struggle has been very, very hopeless. Bosnia survived. Bosnia is not the ideal country today, but we have Bosnia as an independent state, not swallowed by the Milosevic. So this is, for me, has been the profound experience, don't give up. And I must say, let's say it's a really very hard now. I'm now basically for already months dealing with and helping colleagues in Myanmar, where I'm strongly connected. And Myanmar is not the only place. Let's say we basically have something what I call the Putin-Assad doctrine, which basically says crack down as hard and as long as it is necessary to break the resistance, whatever the price is. So even if it is necessary to destroy your own capacity to govern, destroy all your economic assets, destroy the body of your society, do that in order to stay in the power. So this is the level of the violence and the terror what the people struggling for the democracy are placing in many, many places. And we have the international context, which is basically more in favor of the heavy crackdown than it is in favor of the heroic democratic struggle. We have basically blueprints how to heavily crack down. And basically we have a lot of kind of the incentives to do that. We have powers helping that, and we have a lot of enablers in our own society, which are basically playing ahead. So it's a heavy struggle. And then in many moments, I admit, let's say, I feel despair. And then I kick off in the morning and say, no, do your 3 small things you can do every day and don't give up, because your Bosnians didn't give up, and don't give up on the struggle of the Myanmar people now. So this kind of the determination, let's say, not to give up, bet again and again on the what Rosa Maria said, let's say, the possibility of the hope. Don't let yourself being discouraged by the probability of the most probable, and bet on a hope and stand and struggle. Let's say. And for all of us who are not directly on the front line, keep on understanding, let's say, that basically our most important task is help colleagues on the front line not feel abandoned. Their struggle is hard, and there are many moments with a lot of reasons why they feel abandoned. What we can do, let's say, we can help a lot, not just to support them, but really not to feel abandoned.
Igor, thank you so much for that. We talk a lot here at the Endowment about it's not just material support, it's the moral support. You've captured that. And thank you for that drive to never give up. I think all of us have learned, never control you, never control Carl. We need those ideas keep coming. But let me bring it back here in Washington to Nathan. And Nathan, you've had to take some extraordinary risks and some extraordinary sacrifices. Explain that, what has driven and motivated you and continues to motivate you.
Thanks, Nathan, for the question, and thanks, Carl, for your service for democracy. For me, I think I've been through different stages of getting that inspiration and that motivation for me to keep going. When I was a student leader in protest site, it was more about like matching people's expectation, like giving hope to them, empowering them. And for now, things have it's been through different stages because of how the situation in Hong Kong is deteriorated and how my fellows have been suffering because of that. Today is the Mid-Autumn Festival for Chinese culture, and this is a Thanksgiving Day, equivalent to Thanksgiving Day. So we probably will go back home and then to dine with families. And so as if I could, I would be home and then to dine with my families. But I have been absent from that. I was absent in 2017 when I was in jail. I was absent last year, and I'm absent this year because I had lived in a life of exile since last year, and I severed my ties with my families after I left because I'm worried that my connection to them may endanger them. And it applies to a lot of political fighters and campaigners in Hong Kong. A lot of us are live in the life of exile, and more of us are living in prison or on the way to prison. In Hong Kong, basically, most of the political campaigners that I know, that I personally been connected to, that I've worked with them for past few years, they are all in jail because of different reasons. Some of the most observed reasons are inciting subversion in Hong Kong, which they were merely participating in a primary election or holding the Tiananmen massacre vigil every year, or even just being vocal to China's human rights violation. And for some, they are participating in protests and the government arrests them because of that. Nonetheless, a lot of them, they cannot meet their families in this particular day. And just try to put yourself into your shoe. If for a very, very long time, in every Thanksgiving Day, you cannot share the joy with your families, how do you feel? And I think that really deeply touches me, especially some of the very fine young talents like Joshua Wong, and they are all in jail. And I'm here, I have the luxurious freedom that I can speak freely, I can interact with all the stakeholders in the international level. I feel obliged to speak for them. And I think that really marks what my really deep down motivation is to save my friends, is to speak their stories, is to try to unite the force around the world to really address the problem. One point that Igor mentioned, I do agree with, is for now in our international system, there is basically not enough accountability being held for authoritarian regimes. We've been seeing the global rise of authoritarianism for more than a decade, but for now we still haven't sorted out ways and mechanisms that we can hold them accountable, just like what has happened in Hong Kong. And the case of Hong Kong is really remarkable, and it has global implication because we could really see that such an international free city can be eroded in just a short period of time because the government, there's no checks and balances to them. And I think it really shows an example of how precious our freedoms are and how fragile are them. And I think this is a great example for us to remind every one of us in this room and who are caring about democracy, which we are the guardians of it. We're not only enjoying them, but we have the responsibility to defend them. And we have to expand that responsibility, not only to our domestic politics, but on a global level, because with the rise of globalization, the impact of authoritarianism with its economy is much more intertwined in today's world. It is impossible for us to say that, we should just take care of Americans' democracy without being aware that there are a lot of international influence that may also erode our freedoms and democracy on our soil. So I think it is time for change. It's important for us to get the global agenda on how to address the rise of authoritarianism. We need global agenda, global a mission, and the steps that we have to take, that we need a much more united coalition in between democracies. And we see the rise of authoritarianism as an existential crisis, as we see issues of pandemic, of global poverty, of arms proliferation, etc. So I think if we are still lacking that mentality, if we still lacking that perception, there is no change and there is no actions out of it. So I think it's important that no matter is for the US that we will be having a democracy forum or in some other institutions, we just have to make that perceptual change. And we have to see that as our threat, and we need to address the problem as soon as possible before it's too late.
Thank you. Thank you, Nathan. We're watching sort of the crescendo of pressure in Hong Kong as we speak, with pressure on many organizations there right now. I want to come back to the concept of the United Coalition that you mentioned, Nathan. But Zainab wanted to follow, wanted to bring, close the opening comments. So we come to you, Zainab, in Nairobi, with someone who has sort of the unique perspective of the struggle from Sierra Leone to your leadership today on the international stage against many odds. And what has motivated you in your own contribution to this this fight for a democratic future?
I think, thank you very much. I first and foremost want to congratulate you taking over the presidency of NED. And I really want to thank Carl for who he is. You know, when you meet Carl and you work with Carl, the things that come very close in memory is enthusiasm. Carl is always bumbling with ideas. You know, it's the whole issue of freedom and democracy is like part of his DNA. You don't have any education. Every time you meet Carl, he's thinking about how do we solve the next problem? Where is the next problem? He's always, his energy is just something you cannot deal with when you're around him. For me, I think, you know, I come from a Muslim, traditional Muslim background, Africa. You know, my father was going to marry me off at the age of 12. My mother refused, he sort of abandoned us. And at the later stage, he came to play a very prominent role. So the whole issue is why somebody who didn't care about you, who left you, has a right over your life. It's the whole issue of freedom, being able to say what you want, not being allowed to be what you want. I saw the advantage as a woman realizing that I have a right to make my own decision. And sometimes those rights are trampled not only by family because of who you are, but by the state. And I also grew up in a one-party state. That combined with the fact that when I came to the US on the program, Pluralism and Grassroots Democracy, I did political science, but I never lived in a democratic state. And here I came to the US for this program for young African leaders. So I can't say I was brainwashed, but all of a sudden, I realized the things that I was thinking, the struggle that was going to mind, the questions I was asking actually was here. I took the time they took me across the US, and then I realized actually I understood for the first time what freedom was. Your ability to be able to make your own decision, and irrespective of who you are, you have a voice. And that voice has rights. You can express yourself, you can demand for things, and you can hold people accountable. They have to respond to you. That background is...
Zainab, did we lose you at a key moment? Do we have you online? She has a voice, it will be heard. Zainab, we lost you for just 1 minute, but I think you're back with us.
Yes, the fact that you have a voice, but the fact that you have certain values, you know, and these people will defend you. I think I went into that fight, didn't care what the consequences, because I knew somewhere around the world, whether it's the US ambassador in Freetown, the British High Commissioner, or Carl in Washington had my back. And they were hearing me, they were monitoring me. And so all that fight, that passion you're able to unleash, You're able to go out there. And I can tell you, it's the most inspiring thing for an activist, knowing that there are people who support you morally as well as financially. And you don't have to fear, because you know if you're arrested today, there's somebody who is going to campaign for you. And I think that's where NED comes in, because NED doesn't only provide space for people, provide support, but also they're a voice to defend the principles and values you think. And I think, like, I sit here, I hear what Natal is talking about Hong Kong, and I hear what everybody has said about Carl. I believe that we're not going to go back. The demand for freedom is so deep-rooted. You know, no leader in this world has a monopoly over dictatorship anymore. You know, it doesn't matter. Look at Brazil, how people are demonstrating. It doesn't matter how tough the dictator is. There's still resistance. And I head up with a very interesting story. I went home in July to meet my second grandchild. And I have a 4-year-old grandson. He was sleeping with me. He woke up, he said, "Grandma, I want to tell you something." I said, "What is it?" "Oh, Grandma, the maid does not respect me." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Oh, she doesn't listen to me." This is a 4-year-old boy. It's not that he's been indoctrinated. But if that boy at that age can talk about he wants to say something, he wants to be listened to, and he said that the maid, and he went to the maid and said to the maid, "You're not respecting me. You're not listening to me." That is what the future is. And I think, you know, it's like in my African tradition, we have a proverb: when a snake is dying, they fight. They really fight back. Whether we like it or not, democracy is so deep-rooted. The values, the norm, they're so deep-rooted in our societies. The dictators can fight. They can put people in prison. But if you compare the response to dictators 30 years ago and the response now, the number of young people who are going to the street, who would have imagined the Arab Spring, it's still a challenge, but the resistance is still ongoing. So for me, it's the role that NED is playing and what Carl is saying. That's why I'm happy about the resources. The NED has to be there for the people in the front line, to support them, to give them hope, to inspire them, to provide a moral guarantee that, you know, we're here for you. We listen to you, we hear you, and we support you. So for me, that was what inspired me, because I went into the battle realizing that there are people who are there for me. No matter, I'm not lost in the crowd. You know, I'm not a figure, I'm a name. And there are people who are fighting for me. When I escaped as a refugee, the people who saved me was CNN. Because when I was jumping in the boat, the military was coming with their gun. The CNN turned their camera. And that's the camera that the world saw. Me jumping in a boat, running into exile. If the CNN had not been there, they could have shot me. You know, so these are all the things I think is extremely important for people to understand. The support you give to people on the ground, their voices, you amplify their voices. You give them hope, you inspire them, you make them to believe that whatever they are doing, their struggle, is not alone. There is a family of NED behind them, waiting to support them and to be able to make sure, even if in the cause they die, their names will not go in vain and they will be remembered.
Zainab, thank you so much for those inspiring words. We are so grateful that your mom was rebellious and ensured that we could hear that voice. You mentioned the importance of having your back. And I just want to say it's one of the things I have seen in spades since being part of the NED team and family, watching Aung Ma Zin and what he has done with those in Myanmar, Lin Lee with supporting those on the ground in Hong Kong, Amira Mati, our colleagues who are with us today, what she's done to stand by those in Afghanistan. That's at the heart of the DNA of this team. It's remarkable. And Zainab, you put your finger on it. I wanted to pick up on one of the themes that a couple of you mentioned. And Igor, maybe I'll jump back to you because you underscored the learning that's taking place among the authoritarians and the challenge that we're facing because of that. We've got Will Dobson with us, who has written so eloquently about the dictator's learning curve. When we see what unfolds in Minsk, it's clearly being coached from Moscow. You made this point about Burma, and you called Igor for a more, I think you said a more common cause. It's one of our focus here is how do you ensure that those on the front lines of democracy and freedom are learning and connecting and learning as rapidly together and their fight and their cause as the dictators are. We're committed to fostering democratic unity here. Is there space for a more common cause? And I think, Nathan, you put it as a more united coalition of Democrats to stop the rise of the authoritarians. Igor?
So, look, on one side, I must say, and that's following what Zainab and Nathan has said, let's say we have out there such a robust, let's say, such a domestically driven, such a genuine bottom-up democratic demand and drive. I'm bringing experience of Belarus, Myanmar now. Nathan is speaking about that in Hong Kong. Rosa Maria is speaking about Cuba. So it's out there. There is no need to, to make something, to instigate something. The other thing, let's say, I think, let's say, there is such a level of the skills, level of the capacity, level of the domestic resources, the level of the organizational capacity, leadership, networks, maybe a little bit less strategic capacity, but that's also kind of the learning there. So in a certain way, those qualities are there. There is extraordinary courage, mind-blowing courage of what people are doing, and there is a capacity to endure very, very long battles, to sustain battles for months and a year against the very harsh violence. So I would, in a certain way, say I and my civil society in the Czech Republic has less capacity, it has less to learn. My friends in Myanmar and my friends in Belarus or my friends in Cuba, in a certain way, they know. So our role is really, let's say, kind of a lot to, support, be patient, multiply their voices, undermine enablers in our own society. So this is on one level. On another level, let's say, what I'm strongly kind of advocating, doing myself, let's say, I'm personally investing 1/4 of my time, capacity, and energy to help friends in the battles they do, which are not kind of my immediate battle. And I do it systematically. In a certain way that I don't only rely on Carl and Ned to help me, but I engage to help, let's say, kind of the people who are to do what is important for them. And that is creating a level of the additional trust, encouragement, and empowerment that basically kind of we activists who have gone through these battles are supporting each other and standing one behind other. So this is something what I am strongly kind of advising to the many colleagues with a big experience. Root yourself in your own struggle, but dedicate a certain amount of your time and capacity to encourage and work with the similar colleagues which are in a similar battles in other places. We can't work and jump at every trouble it is around, but pick up few of them so that we create a little bit more synergies, which will then, I think, much more probably lead us also to where Nathan is saying. Let's say, so that to create in a certain way also bottom up, let's say, solidarity between kind of the activists on the ground.
Thank you, Igor. Let me come to Rosa Maria. Do you see the scope for, as Igor put it, more intentional working together in solidarity with activists, a sense of common cause? And I think you're even aware in a lot of our work related to Cuba, if you think about Latin America, how to connect Cuba in a larger debate so that there's common cause across those that share the values for democracy and freedom in Latin America. And this has been a focus of our work, talking about Cuba and Mexico and throughout South America. So give me a sense of what you see as the possibility of that common cause.
Well, I think it's strategic, just as Igor mentioned it, is part of what also help us to keep the hope, but it has also a very tactic and an important sense when you realize that in for instance, the fraternity, the solidarity between the Cuban activists and the Venezuelan activists, it's not just it's not just a reality because friendship and compassion. It's also a reality because at the end of the day, we are facing the same evil. And those who are responsible for oppression in Venezuela and in Cuba are pretty much connected. And that's a reality that you can extend to the authoritarian threats that other countries in Latin America are experiencing right now from several different dimensions. And of course, there is the ideological dimension that Carl was just talking to us a few minutes ago, and all the resources and the effort that authoritarian regimes, as the Cuban one, has put through decades to, in my opinion, intoxicate the minds and the political spectrum in the world, but especially in Latin America, but also very practical dimensions, as the connections between, for instance, the intelligence service of the Cuban regime and the basis of communist parties in the region, or the connections between the Cuban regime and criminal organizations or guerrilla organizations in the region. We could mention the FARC, but we could mention almost all the guerrilla organizations, now drug dealers organizations in the region. But we can even expand that beyond our hemisphere and realize that in July 12th, when the whole world was watching the images of the Cuban military shutting down people in the streets, well, the Kremlin unshamefully just put there a statement encouraging Miguel Díaz-Canel to use all the means within the Cuban law to pacify the unrest, words more, words less. And when you go to the Cuban law, you realize that yes, the Cuban military were killing people in the streets, but the Cuban constitution imposed by them installed as a right the armed struggle against anyone that wants to change the communist system, and that was being praised by Russia. So you realize that coalition of democracies that is so much needed right now is in a way behind the coalitions of authoritarians and totalitarians in the world that is already working with a very, in my opinion, sophisticated technology, for lack of a better word, to crush on hope, to crush on the sprints, and that's. I now realize that it seems pretty much pessimistic, but my intention here is to say, and in this and very much with Sana, the Cuban people, the Venezuelan people, the people of Hong Kong, they could be facing the crush and the evil of their authoritarian regimes now, together with other authoritarian regimes, but they are not going to give up. I mean, we are not going to give up. That seek for freedom and for a better life is live within us, and it's going to be a continual battle. So the rest of the world, especially the democratic nations, they could keep doing as if nothing is happening, and they will have to suffer the consequences, as it has happened in Latin America with many democracies that were not so active, are not so active in the defense of freedom abroad, and they have now their own challenge coming from those dictatorships, among other factors. Or they could start to, or maybe start is not the word, or keep doing it, or doing it in a better way, or in a more decisive way, defending democracy in places as Hong Kong, as Cuba, and of course as China, as Russia. And in doing so, United States, the European democracies, the Latin American democracies, the world democracies are not just going to be doing like an altruistic gesture for in favor of those in suffering authoritarian regimes. They are going to be defending their own democracies and their own freedoms, and that's something that we need to stress and repeat as much as we can.
Thank you, Rosa Maria. Part of what, how when there's a challenge in Nicaragua and Venezuela and Cuba, it doesn't remain limited to the people of Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, but those that share a sense of solidarity to rise together with them. So let me jump back to Zainab. In this context, Nathan had called for this more united campaign. You see a lot of things in a perch at the United Nations. How should democracies, the democratic world, respond when activists are both under pressure, but also countries that support them are under pressure? You take a small Lithuania where Belarus's Lukashenko is weaponizing migrants, and China is cutting off contracts to Lithuanian firms because of its solidarity with Taiwan. How should the democratic world respond both for activists and those small countries that are under pressure, Zainab?
Thank you very much. I think first, I spoke about the word of having moral guarantors, and I think that's what the role like the US and the UK and others were playing. Because, when you have small countries like we have in Sierra Leone, when you are being affected and threatened, it's a community of nations, to be able to show solidarity to smaller countries and support them, just like NED supports activists. I think it's extremely important that countries understand the countries that are being affected and they are being threatened. And that's why a place like the United Nations is there, so that the strength of the United Nations is actually a convening ability to convene countries on around issues. And it doesn't matter how big or small you are, you can always bring the issue on the table and it can be discussed. And I think the one thing that we should be very grateful for is technology. The role technology has come to play. There's no secret anywhere. So no matter what you're doing in a country, somebody just needs to get a camera or has a Facebook page and it's going viral. And so that way, you cannot suppress people for long. You cannot keep those information locked up in your countries. They will go out, and people who share the same, values will come together and actually work. So I think that community of nations among nations, countries, just like it is among civil society, NED is working with civil society to provide support, it should also happen with countries. Because then if you're a small country, you're trying to fight in the midst of big neighborhood, and you actually want to commit to those values, you will be under threat. But once they know that you have people, bigger countries, that supporting you, that recalling those that drawing attention to the world at what is happening, trust me, I have to tell you, dictators are cowards. A lot of the time they fight back because they're afraid. They're afraid of the power of the individual, the human. So they try to suppress that ability to express yourself, and that's what they've not been able. I say to myself, all these dictators, they're an endangered species. There is nowhere you have a dictator today that is not resisted, that is not being resisted, be it at the international desk or at their own country. So what we need to be able to guarantee is to make sure those people who are fighting can actually know there are people who have their backs. It's whether we like it or not, the demand for political independence, for political voice is too deep-rooted for somebody to wipe it out. It's not possible. You know, and I tell you, when I was in New York, I'll be amazed. My village, we don't even have a school there. It's a small village, but trust me, any activity I do, somebody sees it in Facebook. And sometimes I'm surprised they have their small little phone. They go, oh, I saw you when you went to Morocco. I saw it. And I think that's the important issue. But also on the issue of working together as a team, I think for me, one of the biggest benefits of NED is that it developed a network of individuals. Even when I was in government, when civil society who are fighting corruption, who are grantees of NED, when they have because I was in government back home, when they have a problem with their government, you'll be shocked. They'll call me and say, Zainab, you're coming to Ghana when they hear, can you please say this thing to the president? Can you say this to the minister? You know, that's the power of networking. We are linked together in West Africa. We know each other, you know, and we support each other. We share ideas, you know, to say, you know, why don't you do this thing? Why don't you look at this thing? Why don't you know? Those are the things that NED did for us. The biggest benefit, bringing us together, making us to know each other. The ability with technology now, we can connect very easily. And I think for us in West Africa, it really has helped us because we are smaller countries. We are not like 50 million there, other than Nigeria, maybe Ghana. We are all small countries. And so we know each other. We meet several times a year. We communicate, we engage, we share ideas, and we question, and we tell our people. So I think for me, that's the biggest thing we find. Community of nations working together, believing that this country is fighting for this. I have a responsibility to support them, to be able to be their voice. Because sometimes these small countries cannot talk, but you talk on their behalf. You be their voice, you be their face, and you reflect what they are going through. The same thing as NED is reflecting, is supporting, is being the voice and the faces of civil society in the front line. Thank you.
Zainab, thank you so much. I'm going to close this panel with a very quick question for Nathan because we're going to transition right now. But this panel represents an intentional intergenerational strategy, how to be inspired by those that have led the fight and to carry that on with the next generation. Very briefly, just to close us as we transition, Nathan, how do you see this? Do you and Rosa Maria represent a next generation in this struggle? And many are often concerned when they see skepticism, cynicism about democracy among younger generations, or question whether activists are being prepared to actually help democracy deliver with governance. How do you see the next generation of the struggle?
Well, I think one of the most exceptional examples that we could look into is the Multi Alliance. It's a virtual community that are composed by the netizens and the protesters in Southeast regions that they have been fighting for democracy. People from Myanmar, from Thailand, from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, together to get together under the umbrella of Multi Alliance. And that gives us a community that we can know more of each other, can broadcast each other's activities and their demands, and we are becoming more united than ever. And it's really organic because it is not some organization creating it top down, but it's really a bottom up effort from these people in order to maximize their voice and make their words being heard. I've been actively campaigning for that. Whenever there are Myanmar people organizing protests in London, I'll be there. Because I am part of the community and I can raise that profile so that the actions are being more visible and being heard by a lot more people. And I think that is really fantastic. So that I think it's really important that we have that collaboration. And one thing that authoritarian regime will do to activists or activists in exile is trying to deplatform them, trying to stigmatize them. I've been encountering that for many, many times, that a lot of institutions inviting me for forums, and there are letters from the embassy, Chinese consulate, to warn them that if you invited Nathan Law and if you continue the events, that your relationship with the Chinese government will be tarnished. And there are lots of media campaign from China to stigmatize, that saying that I'm a CIA agent, that I do a lot of bad things. These things that we need narrative to counter that. We need platform for activists to be vocal, and we need them to be more visible on the international level so that they have that resources, they have that capacity to speak up, to counter that, and to represent their people, to genuinely representing the voice of people instead of just an authoritarian regime claiming that they have that representation. So I think these are really crucial things that we could do, especially when there are exile activists or activists who could still leave the country. They should be allowed and they should be given that platform to perform and to offer that narrative.
Thank you, Nathan. One of the soul-nourishing parts of this work is listening and learning from those of you who are in this struggle. Thank you for your words this morning. Please join me in thanking them for their contribution.